Welcome to this conversation with Pete McMorris, a seasoned procurement executive. In this discussion, we'll explore Pete's unique career journey and the unexpected twists and turns that have shaped his strategic approach to procurement. Pete will share insights on the importance of building strong supplier relationships, the value of cross functional collaboration, and how emerging trends like sustainability and digital transformation are transforming the procurement function. Through Pete's experiences in diverse industries, we'll gain a deeper understanding of the evolving role of procurement as a strategic business partner. Let's dive in and learn from Pete's wealth of knowledge and practical wisdom.
Cool. Pete, thank you so much for joining me today.
That's not a problem. Always good to
Thank-
catch up and have a good discussion.
Absolutely. So let's get into it, shall we?
Let's go.
All right. So first question that I wanted to cover with you is if you could share any unexpected twists or turning points in your career that have significantly influenced your approach to procurement.
I mean, I think I got into procurement like many others from a different function. And it wasn't probably something that I put on, my agenda to get into or anything else. It's sort of something that I sort of got into because firstly I was asked, which is always a nice thing. So somebody wanted me to get into procurement, but also because I've been working in factories for maybe 10 years and not really working. I always was leading the factory. So that's a really good insight into lots of things because you are negotiating all the time. You're negotiating with unions often. You're negotiating in terms of keeping your factory open quite often because people want to close, they want you to transform or whatever the whole time. So you're often getting into negotiation there. But really, you get an understanding of strategy, you get a really good understanding of people, you get unions, everything else. But that sort of view of life, getting me then into procurement, it actually was a very natural thing to get into. So I thought I knew quite a lot about it. I'd spoken to a lot of suppliers as well. But actually, something you know quite a lot about, Partner to Win was actually a major, major change for me, but also the way we worked as a business. So that sort of major change where you got into suppliers, you get into strategic partnerships, you get into major relationships, and then you get something massive out of it. You get things like innovation out of it, which you never thought you could. You get sustainability initiatives. You get resilience out of it. And maybe we'll talk a little bit about resilience later, but resilience is something, if you've got a really good partner, suddenly that partner will do much more for you than you ever imagined. So Partner to Win was a major change. But then that's almost when things are going well, you can get into that sort of partnership. And sometimes when they're not so well as well, and you need new innovations. But also resilience. I think there was something which happened to me way back in about, it's not that long ago, it was about 2016, where we were going from a very good position where things were going extremely well to a very difficult position where things were going particularly badly. And that's because we had 2 or 3 major disasters in our supply chain, which really caused us issues. Things like bird flu. And again, you think you've got something covered for bird flu, but then you've got major brands such as we had a mayonnaise, Hellmann's mayonnaise, where suddenly you could get no supply of product. And it was a major product where all over the world, but particularly in the US and the UK, but in parts of Europe, became a major problem. So you had something which went particularly badly. We also, at the same time, we had a major factory burn down in China, which to me is almost old school in terms of when you think of resilience, you talk about burning down factories or whatever, but there's lots of other things can happen in terms of cybersecurity and everything else. But that whole incident meant that we lost a fortune as a business. It's something like 500 million we thought we lost. so not small. So we basically did a huge amount of work to understand how resilience worked, how we got ourselves in a much more secure position. So working on suppliers, materials, etc. So you had alternatives everywhere. But they made me think about things in a different way. Both of those big experiences, one's very positive, the other one can be very negative, but if you prepare for it properly, it can be extremely positive and give you a big competitive edge. In fact, both will give you a big competitive edge.
I love both examples because I think that they really speak to the more strategic nature of procurement. A lot of the time, everybody thinks of it as a pretty transactional function. It, doesn't need a lot of thinking. You're there to manage contracts, manage costs, and that's it. Whereas both of those really demonstrate the importance of being able to think longer term, more strategically, and essentially also demonstrate the impact of not doing it well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this will be the way that I always look at procurement. You've got to look at it from a strategic point of view. Transactional procurement, for one thing, it never gets anybody out of bed in the morning. Nobody is particularly interested in that area. Have you signed the contract? Super important, particularly when you've got a resilience issue. However, that's not what people normally get into procurement for. So I would always say that procurement professionals are business men and women. Okay, they really need to understand what the strategic needs are of the business, because they've got to buy for that business, and they've got to understand the capabilities of their suppliers, because their job really is to orchestrate it, to put those two things together. That's your strategic needs, that's your capability from your supplier. Put the two things together.
Yeah.
Of course, there's transactional elements to that, but the main bit is strategic.
Yeah, and arguably there's transactional elements to any role, right?
Yeah.
It's their basics. But would you say that you always had that view of procurement, even when you were first invited to join, or was it really something like the Partner to Win program that changed your perspective on the role of procurement, the importance of procurement, and the need to think about it more strategically?
I think from a personal point of view, I think I probably had that because I've been running major sites. And got involved quite a lot with the sales and marketing of, there's brands such as Knorr, which I used to run in the UK and things like that. So I'd seen maybe some of the strategic side of it. But certainly when we started to get into Partner to Win, that developed that much greater, and there was much greater impact because of that. Because what I would have found in the past was I still had a little bit of blinkers on, because I was still worried about my little brand in my little country. But Partner to Win and things like that, it completely opens you up to the globe. Because a lot of Partner to Win then, and still what I'm doing now, is you're looking for global initiatives which are going to solve, some of the global problems, if you like. And then you're often looking for global suppliers who are going to be helping you to solve that.
Yeah.
And the big thing about suppliers, that again, people will disagree with this, but my view is that often suppliers will know an awful lot more than you do. Because generally we're working on, I might be working with 10,000 suppliers, but each one of the suppliers knows their little part of the world inside out and backwards. So you've got to rely on their knowledge and, our R&D, whether you're in a major corporation or not, what they're looking at is so many different elements. So, things like Partner to Win, when you're sitting with the CEO of, say, a packaging company, they know everything about that packaging. They know how to make it, so that it's more attractive to your consumers. They also know how to make it thinner, so it's more environmentally friendly. So we don't know that. We think we do, and often we spec something because we think that's what we need. That's not what we need at all. So if you've got that relationship with a supplier, then they can say, Pete, I know you say you want that, but actually, have you looked at this, this, and this? And nobody's like, my God, why didn't we think of this earlier? So there's something out there, and this whole global nature, I'm a big fan of the global nature. Not all the companies I've worked with are global, But if you've got that global view of who can do something for you anywhere in the world and give you that competitive advantage, or be more sustainable, or help your, in my case now, patient or my consumer, then it's going to be good news.
Yeah, and one of the things that we see with our clients, even today, and I mean, how old is the Partner to Win program now? A good 20 years?
Oh, it's not that old. Come on. I think the first one, you're aging me now, Caitlyn. No, I think the first one we ever did was 2012.
Okay.
So 12 years ago, something like that.
12 years. All right. So sorry, I did age you very prematurely there.
But don't do that. No. I know I had long hair at the time, and so.
Was it Partner to Win that caused you to lose your hair?
It could have been that. It could have been that.
But I think that one of the reasons that I think it almost has this like cult fandom to it, at least in the procurement world, is because the values that it eschews are still so relevant and constant today. Because really, what are they? It's about building trust, it's about building mutual value, it's about transparency, openness, which are all things that we're constantly talking to our clients about. But that trust piece is difficult to achieve from the outset. You were talking about listening to your suppliers when they know their packaging inside and out, and they can explain to you why they can or can't do what you want them to do. Mm-hmm. But it takes a certain person, and it takes a lot of trust that the supplier is credible for you to really listen to what they're saying.
No, absolutely. I think you can. I mean, there's a whole thing about. I always talk to all my teams for the last 10 years about, you got to treat your supplier with respect. So you always start with that. You give them respect, and then suddenly you'll be surprised how many people don't. Even now, you can hear people on a call and they're talking to their suppliers, and they're just giving them a really hard time. You think, come on, guys. This is not the way you treat anybody. That's not going to work for anybody. I've been in meetings in even the last few weeks where I've got to stop people, get them off the phone, and say, you're not going to treat them that way. There's got to be a different way. There's got to be a different tone. There's a way of approaching it. And it's a lot of it is like thinking about it, almost putting yourself in the shoes of your supplier. Yeah. What are they looking for from you? What are their targets likely to be? So what are the things that are actually generating the excitement to work with you? Because if they don't want to work with you, it's pretty clear from the outside. So they've got to think of you as a big opportunity. And there's all sorts of 2x2s you can do on this. But to me, a lot of it is common sense. If they see you as a good opportunity, and you actually listen to them, and you start to create some sort of relationship, then you can build that trust fairly quickly. Now, the whole thing about trust is, and you might have heard me say this before, it'll take maybe 2 years to build the trust and then 2 minutes to break it, because somebody runs into the call and makes some ridiculous old school some sort of reaction, or starts shouting and screaming, and suddenly that trust goes. But I've certainly, again, had recent examples where you've had people who have been seen very low in our sort of company's views, and we've turned them now to be virtually our best supplier. And that's by building relationship, by building trust, understanding what they need, as well as making sure that they have the capabilities to meet our needs. So it's always going to be a little bit of a two-way street. And it's not one where we win and they lose. That's not, I know that may be an old school way of looking at things, but you've got, particularly with strategic, I'm not talking about commodity buying. I'm talking about if you really want to build strategic partnerships, and you want to get their best people, you want to get their best innovations, you want them to WhatsApp you first with I've got this great idea, Pete, you want to see it? Those are the sort of things that you should get excited about.
Yes, absolutely. And
I get to go to bed in the morning. It's because that should be exciting for my teams as well. I want people to ring to call me up and on Teams and say, Pete, I've just heard from my supplier. They've got this great idea. That's fantastic. That's exactly what you want from your suppliers.
Yeah, Yeah. You've spoken to it a little bit already that of course, a supplier's capabilities have to match your needs. And it's a two-way street, even in terms of how they manage the relationship, right? So what qualities or attributes do you prioritize when you're choosing suppliers who you're going to invest in long-term partnerships with?
I mean, you've got some of the basics in there. So yes, are they capable of building a relationship? So you got to first, you don't even know actually when you first set out whether you even want to talk to these people in terms of, do I want to get involved in this, or is this something which is a commodity? So you've got to know that their products are meeting your strategic needs. So in medical equipment, you're always looking for something which will give you a competitive advantage, something which will be much better for your patients, your consumers, things that your doctors will like. Does it speed up the process? Does it give better quality of results? Um, the equipment has got to be of good quality. Is it going to last? Are we going to have it for 3 years and then it's burned out? Has it got a sustainability element to it? Is got to be key. If it's using a huge amount of energy, even though it might be improving the lives of people, maybe it does on one side, but it takes away on the other side. So there's a number of things that you would look at. And of course, you got to look at cost too. That doesn't ever go away. So if you think of the sort of pillars that I've introduced in this job that I'm doing, it's all about, it's always going to be cost and cash because that's always going to be one of the procurement pillars.
Yes.
But my next one's always going to be about strategic partnership and innovation.
Yeah.
But then sustainability, ESG principles are going to be a massive part of what we do. And then a fourth one will always be about internal collaboration. So when I've mentioned, being businessmen and women, you've got to understand what our business wants and hopefully be part of that decision making as well, but understand what the needs are. And again, having the capabilities. So it's putting those things together. But if you don't have that internal collaboration, and you are seen as procurement and you're sitting in some office in the middle of the world and nobody sees you, then that's not going to work. It will become very transactional and very processy and have we signed a contract or not? And that's not the way I ever want procurement to work.
Yeah. The point around that need for internal collaboration is actually so interesting, and it makes you wonder why so many companies do put their procurement teams in some random remote office on some outpost somewhere.
It often is that way. And sometimes it's for tax reasons and everything else. But you need to be close to the markets. You need to understand what's happening there. My closest people that I work with here are strategic business units, so SBU leads who are running big categories. And they come normally from a bit of a mix. Some of them are marketeers, some of them are medical professionals. And certainly within that team, you've got a mix of that. So I want to be really close to those people. Operations people who might be running all the labs in this particular case, but in previous cases, it would have been running factories or whatever. I'd still know them all. I'd have a personal contact with them, but also, as I say, with sales and marketing as well. Those are people that you should know. And if you're a CPO, you should know them extremely well, because these are the people that you're part of that business decision making, because you should know all that's out there in the market, or your team should for you. But you should always be super close to the business. So internal collaboration, to me, it's obvious. As you say, to many, it doesn't seem to be. And where you position your procurement teams, in times it's been bonkers. One of my favorite words, bonkers. Why do we do that? Because it's not close to any market whatsoever. It's like also putting everyone in a head office. It depends who's in that head office. Because if you've only got certain functions in there and you're not close enough to the business to understand what we really do, like an FMCG, if you don't know what we make, or you've never been into a factory, if in medical, if you're not into labs, you don't understand how the lab works. Well, how can you do buying properly? Because you don't really know what people want. And that's got to be part of it. It's not just a piece of paper that says, I want this. really what enhances that, what makes a difference to your internal stakeholders, and at the end of the day, your stakeholders, your patients, your consumers at the end of the day.
Yeah. It really begs the question that, you know, in order to be a successful procurement practitioner, you have to have had experience in the rest of the business too, surely.
Yeah, you do. I mean, you don't need to have been everywhere. You wouldn't start out on, you know, when you're 23 or something, come out of university and say, I'm going to do this, this, and this. Although that would be nice. And some graduate schemes do a little element of that.
Yeah.
As many as I would like, because I love the idea of you spend 3 years and you spend a bit of time in a factory, a bit of time in sales, a little bit of time abroad. There's also, and I like those sort of schemes. I'm a big advocate for that type of thing. And it definitely helps that you've been in other functions. I think for me, it's certainly helped my career, my thinking, and everything else to be in other functions. But if you go into procurement straight away, as long as you keep making sure that you're understanding what the strategic needs are, making sure you understand the markets, making sure you understand who your key stakeholders are, both externally and internally, and working with them on a very regular basis and getting involved in all their senior meetings and whatever, then you can do it. So you don't have to deliberately have been in 15 functions. But it probably helps. But if you're the right sort of personality, you can still make it happen yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. You've already referred to it a little bit, but what sort of unique experiences did you have outside of procurement? So, for example, in the factories that you think have provided you with the most valuable insights or skills that, you know, maybe you even not even just applying them to your previous positions, but what about your position today?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit of a mixture. So the factory one was a really good, it's a really important element. So and it was something that actually I really enjoyed as well. And you get the whole people thing. You have to build your own strategies when you're in a factory. Because, as I said earlier, you know, factories, particularly in the large corporations, you've got to make a factory that people actually want to keep. So you've got to change things in terms of, you know, whether it's your bottom line, whether it's a profitable factory, whatever it might be. You've always got to change. You've always got to make a change. And you know, there's been major times when we've had to transform and unfortunately make people redundant or whatever. But at least at the end of the period, then the factory remains open, competitive for all the right reasons. If a factory just isn't running for the right reasons, then it closes. So you may also make that decision at times. But that sort of a background actually helped me a lot in procurement. I would say also going into different industries has really helped my views on procurement. You might know many others. You know, I've done a lot of work in motorsports and Formula One. Very different perspectives you get there, because what your view is, you know, and it almost gets not boring, but almost a bit repetitive, because it's almost a get out of jail clause. And people will just say, every time you do something, people say, does it make the car go faster? You know, so that is always, and it's great because it makes you think about what you're trying to achieve. And you can get to, oh, I've done this little transaction, I've done this, or I've done, is it really adding to whether that whole team is successful or not? Because if it's not, you probably shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
It could be helping the business, and if you help the business and the bottom line's better, then you can maybe get better cars and better drivers and everything else. But it gives you a different perspective. And I like that, and I've done that in Formula One, but also Formula E. And then which is got a different view, because you've got to think about sustainability, and does this give the right sustainability angle? And again, when you're getting into then the more the pharma side or the medical side, again, it gives you a completely different view, because you're actually saving people's lives or helping to save people's lives. So again, yeah, that makes the car go faster. But if you get that wrong, you kill people. So, you know, there's real extremes. FMCG, you think you're having, oh, we're having a really bad week because sales are really bad. Yes, that's important, but it's maybe not as important as some other things. So you got to always look at, again, it takes me back to the longer term view of how do you make the businesses successful, sustainable in many ways, you know, the sustainability of the company in terms of it succeeds, thrives, and exists in a few years' time, but also sustainability on the green side as well. So there's an element of where I've been in terms of different functions, but also different businesses and different ways of thinking about things, which I think is really important. If you can think outside your own, again, your blinkers of your own industry, then I think that really, really helps you.
Yeah, I love the example of, does this make the car go faster? Because there's a single point of focus and a really strong message to your suppliers, that about sums it up, doesn't it? You know,
Yes.
what do we want? To make the car go faster. If you have ideas that can support that, then come and talk to us. We want to hear from you. And
Yes.
it's a very appealing proposition to suppliers, right? Because it denotes winning in its very
Yeah.
purpose.
Absolutely. And I think the question is then, how do you get that sort of view over in other industries? Because
Yes.
you're effectively saying the same thing. You know,
Yeah.
you can say in medical, how do you make this piece of equipment save lives? You know, how does it make people live longer? How there are other ways you can frame it, which can energize both your suppliers, but also your team.
Yeah.
Because again, that's the other thing about motivating people and getting them on board with what you're trying to achieve. Because otherwise, it can feel like, oh yeah, yeah, I did a few negotiations this week. I saved a little bit of money. I'll go home. You would rather have somebody that has a purpose for what they're doing.
Yeah. And you know, the patient one always sounds like a really good idea. We work with a lot of farmers, but they're all doing it. So there's also a big challenge around, well, I don't know, how do you make your patient sound more important than your supplier's other customers' patients? Or why
Yeah.
is it that your mission and what you're trying to achieve is the one that's going to make them prioritize you? And I think that that's then where you've got to make them believe in how you're going to save the patient, how you're going to deliver value to the patient, so that your suppliers can sit there and go, I really back this company.
Yes.
Their strategy is the one that I bet on,
Yes.
over and above the strategies that I'm hearing from my other customers.
Absolutely. And it's the same medical. I mean, the Formula One example again is quite good there, where you've got, I was working for Williams. So
Yeah.
if you're at Williams and you're up against Ferrari and Mercedes and Red Bull and an awful lot of money, how can you make yourself more attractive than some of your biggest competition? And it's exactly the same in medical. We're not the biggest in the world, but how do you make sure that these people want to work with you first?
Yeah.
So you've got to, this is where, you know, procurement becomes not just buying, it's selling. So you're selling to very large organizations who have a choice of where they go. And you've probably heard other people say that, particularly people who've been involved in Partner to Win. But, you know, it is one of those that you can be relatively small, but you're more attractive because you're more exciting. You can make it more exciting from a, you know, personally, people can engage with your vision of where you're trying to go. Also, you can give them more time. You can give them opportunities if they've got brand new innovations. Just other people may not take them on board. You say, okay, I'm going to take on your innovation. I'll be your guinea pig. I'll be something which makes us a bit more interesting. And when you're doing that, you can build those sort of relationships, which means that you can get into this partnership and you can drive the two businesses in the right direction.
The analogy that I always like to draw is with employer branding. You know, what about, I'll say 20 years ago again.
You're obviously older than you look at them.
Oh, you know just what to say.
Well, you were trying to make me very old earlier, so I'm trying to.
But, you know, all of these, I think it was probably more the tech companies, you know, in San Francisco, who were all competing for the very best engineers.
Yes.
Suddenly realized that, you know, the candidate pool is not unlimited, and the best employees are probably already hired. They're in a great job. They're getting paid a really good salary. They don't really have any intention of leaving. So how is it that you make your company look like the best possible place to work that they'd be willing to consider moving? And I think that's the exact same thing that procurement need to do today. It's like, well, you know, our suppliers are working with all of our competitors. They, you know, they're probably pretty happy with how those relationships are going. How is it that we're going to make ourselves look so competitive and like the best possible choice for them to want to invest their best people, to give us their best ideas, to give us the best possible terms, all of the preferential treatment over and above those other competitors? Like, we always talk about it in terms of like, well, what makes you unmissable? You know, how are you going to position yourselves to be that unmissable partner that your suppliers are all clamoring to work with? And then it's selling.
No, and I think this thing's always got to be genuine as well. So if you get into a position, you say you've got to make an attractive vision. So there's got to be something out there which attracts them straight away. If we go back to Partner to Win or a supplier type major event you might take on. If you're saying, firstly, you're inviting people, do you know, it is amazing how that makes a difference. Because it was a big thing and then it went away and now it's come back again. And I think mostly when I'm inviting people to come to something, they get so excited. It's surprising. It's almost like, I think the pandemic did it to some extent. People didn't do anything for 3 years and maybe we're out of it the last 18 months, 2 years. But it's amazing how many people still don't travel. Most calls are on Teams, etc. So there's a little bit, and I'm not massively into the idea of making everybody travel, because there's this sustainability angle, but you got to get that balance right.
Okay.
But you've got to make it exciting. So there's got to be a reason why they want to be there. You've then got to be in a situation where if you've got that vision, you can feel that they're engaged in that. You've got to make them feel special. Everybody or every company wants to feel special. So if you can say, okay, I will give you this opportunity in this field, which you know is going to help them as well. If you can give them that opportunity and it's a genuine offer and you actually follow through with it, because that's another thing that often doesn't happen. If you follow through with it, suddenly people say, oh, it was a great opportunity. Whether it worked or didn't work, it was a big opportunity. If it works, obviously it flies. If it doesn't work, well, we still have the opportunity. You build the relationship and then you can go from there. One of the worst things you can do is almost the opposite. You can bring them to a major event, you offer them something, and then it fizzles out and nothing ever happens. Because then they say, well, that was a waste of time and money. I traveled to the US or I traveled to Geneva or wherever I went and nothing happened. That's almost like you completely lose it. It's almost like the trust discussion. You know, you build them up and then, well, so you've got to make sure that you follow up and something comes out of it.
I'd even add that you invite them to something that's a complete waste of their time. Or they are sitting there going, I could have done this on my laptop at home.
Yeah.
You know, you just show a complete disregard and disrespect for the time they've taken to be with you, and you don't give them anything valuable.
No,
you don't
absolutely. You've got to, and like when we go back to events and we think about supplier events, people often think when they first go, this is going to be a bit of a waste of time. Okay, why am I here? They said it had to be the CEO. I've got 10 other things that I could be doing which are more beneficial to me or beneficial to the business. So why do I go? So if they go, they've got to come back thinking, bloody hell, that was good. You know, that's got to be something a little bit special. It's got to be something a little bit memorable. Certainly one of the things that I've taken away from lots of supplier events is I've had people coming back afterwards and said, that was brilliant. Not only was it very beneficial from a business point of view, but I actually enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Which is makes such a difference because they want to talk about that when they go back. So their team say, well, where have you been? And you know, they do town halls. We all do town halls. You can say where you've been and what you've heard and what's got you excited. Yeah. And you know, that can generate such a difference within your organization.
Such a great sense of goodwill, right? It's
Yeah,
you can't underestimate that.
no,
Um,
but you got to follow up. And I think that's always the point with this is you have a wonderful experience. You go back, you go back to your partner and your kids, and you say, I actually had quite a good time. You go back to your teams, you say the same thing. 3 months later, if nothing's happened, then all that goodwill that you've mentioned starts to, so you need to back it up.
yeah,
Back
for
it up.
sure, for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about the future. What are some of the emerging trends that you're seeing in procurement that you're kind of like most excited about, and how do you see them transforming supplier relationships even further in the longer term?
I mean, the sort of obvious ones, and some of them have been around for a while, like ESG has been around for a long time.
Yeah.
It's been around for a long time, but people haven't done much about it, if I'm honest. You know, it's almost one of those. It's still, if the company's not doing quite as well as they would like to, then it gets a little bit. It's one of the ones that gets a little bit chopped here and there. It almost feels like if you think about the other point, people know they've got to do it. They know that there's legislation coming their way, or it's already there, so they're trying to make sure that they get over that legislation line, if you like. My view is a bit different than that. You've got to beat that line. You've got to be really going for something that's going to make a difference. Now, there's a lot of reasons why. You know, if you talk about the trends, it's by almost, we've talked a lot about supplier relationships. It's amazing. If you talk to most suppliers about innovation, most people are really into it. They're mostly into it personally, and you've always got to think about who's on the other end of the team's call or whatever. But their businesses nearly always have a target as well. So they nearly always have a target. So suddenly people are interested. And it's not the same conversation as negotiating about cost. So you've almost got this personal thing that people, good, we're going to talk about something that's really interesting. Your team is also really generally into it. I mean, Unilever was a perfect example. Virtually everybody was into sustainability. It was a strategy for the business. And virtually everybody had the same, not everybody, but a lot of people had the same sort of beliefs and and values, and believed this was the right way to go anyway. So you can get the right people, you can recruit the right people, you can retain the right people. So this whole area, and I think where we have been, probably pandemic probably slowed things down, and where I think people are still going through this measuring where you are, measuring scope 3, where your suppliers are, and all this measuring thing. I've heard this so many times where I say, well, I don't know if that measurement's right, so we'll do it again. Come on, guys. It really, if you get it wrong by 20%, it really doesn't matter. The big thing is you've got to take action. So you've got to go away and start doing something with it. And I think that's whether I've been working with very large corporations or smaller corporations, or even some of the, even the smaller businesses, even the the Formula One. Some of those businesses aren't big. They struggle with it at times, but you've got to get it back into being high profile, because it's the right thing to do. But it's also, if you don't get in there, you will be penalized either by your consumers will not appreciate your business, because they'll look at it more and more and they'll say, well, they're not doing anything in sustainability, so we'll go to that company rather than that company. But as I say, there's lots of reasons why it's the right thing to do, but it's a lot of it is also internal. It does get people motivated if they believe there's a proper purpose behind what they're doing.
Yes.
Healthcare is quite an easy one, but lots of other FMCG should be easy as well. But so ESG is there. I think there's always people talking an awful lot about digital and AI and things like that. And it's basically thinking about how that can make your job easier, how you can get more information, more analytics, which can actually make your job work better. It started with things like ERP, and that probably was 20 odd years ago, but it's still super important. And then you got other systems, like you're using too many brands, but you can use Coupas and all sorts of other things, but to give you more analytics. And also in the innovation space, you've got lots of other ones out there, which we know well, like Visible and others, where you need to have business, you need that sort of information. That those sort of tools can actually make a big difference about your jobs. And I've worked in several companies where there's been a lot of acquisitions.
Yeah.
And this hand maybe know what they think they're doing, and somebody else is looking at something else. You need this sort of consolidation of all this information and digital and AI. I mean, AI can do all sorts of things for you can never have imagined. I've been talking about old school supplier passports. You may have heard this
Oh,
from I love supplier passports because I never want to walk into an organization where I don't understand where we fit. I don't understand what the relationships are like. I don't understand their strategy. I don't understand their P&L. I want to know all that stuff when I go in. You'll be surprised with a bit of AI. You ask a couple of questions and AI, they'll give you most of that information. Maybe not the relationship, but they'll tell you who the key people are, and you'll probably know who to. You can do that in seconds now, where it would have taken me just going around in Google and getting my team to do it, and a lot of form writing and everything else. So there's lots of things in the sort of the digital space which I think can make a big difference to procurement and lots of other functions too.
it's such a good point, right? Because Microsoft in particular, I think, are now partnering with some of their biggest customers around implementing like generative AI solutions. And I just think, imagine if you could plug that into your SRM tool and
Yeah,
then say, hey, tell me about this relationship we have with X supplier.
yeah,
It's all there for you,
it's
right?
all that. Yeah, I mean, most of the things, even sort of things you do which are 100 years old, probably things like SWOTs. You
Yeah.
know, but I want to, I want the SWOT of a supplier before I go in. I want somebody to have worked out, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, and all that. What are the big opportunities? What are the big things in their strategy which we can work with them to
Yeah.
help them, as long as it helps us at the same time. And again, the two-way street there. But you can do a lot of that stuff very quickly just using other tools that you probably couldn't use before. And by the way, I always like SWOT thinking about what they think of us as well. I've always done that. That's a big, put it in suppliers, shoes and thinking, what's your company like? Because if
Yeah.
they think that you are rubbish and you're a pain in the backside to work with, and we make no margin and that sort of stuff, then it's super, super interesting. But again, you can find out that information
Yeah.
much more simply than you could have done in the past. So digital, all sorts of systems, you do need something in there.
Yeah.
You'll be surprised how many companies really don't have that.
Yeah. You know what I love about what you've mentioned is none of the kind of trends, let's call them, are massively innovative or they're not disruptive, but it is about having a really comprehensive understanding about what this thing is and then being able to execute against it exceptionally well.
No, I totally agree with that. And just to add to what you said, though, because I think there's something about the trends may not be that innovative in themselves, and this is almost, it comes back to the partnering and the relationships and everything else, because where you get the massive innovation again is often because you're doing, and maybe it seems a little bit old school, but you're still doing the same thing about building strategic partnerships. And often that huge, oh my God moment comes from a supplier coming in and offering you something. And I've had two or three circumstances but I always remember where somebody's given me, some sort of a WhatsApp call or just get on WhatsApp and says, Pete, I've got to speak to you about this. And it's something which is like mind-blowingly exciting. And you think, well, that's only because I had the partnership. So the big change has come from maybe something which is a fairly old school concept, which is build strategic partnerships, build trust, build the relationships, and something else will come out of it, which could be mind-blowingly exciting.
Yes. Yes. But you've got to have the relationship there, right?
Yeah, because otherwise they go to somewhere else. And I think that's always got to be the point. I will always say to all my teams, if they're not coming to you first, then you're doing your job right.
Yeah. So as a CPO at the moment, how are you positioning your organization to kind of execute against these trends really well?
Yeah. I mean, I think what you need to have within your organization, I mean, always with the organization, they've got to be motivated and energized. And that's very easy to say, but is often not the case because a lot of people work very long hours. A lot of people got a lot of pressure. They got a lot of pressure on some of their targets, etc. So I think almost firstly, you've got to be in a situation where your team want this to happen. So to have that sort of intrigue of what's out there, you know, have this idea of what can I think of which is going to make, back to our analogy, make the car go faster or make the patient healthier or make the brand more sustainable or whatever. So you've got to have something in there which drives your team to be, you know, interested, excited about going out into the big world and finding something new. So that you can't do it all yourself. You need a team that's really engaged and energized to do that. So I think that's fundamental. You also need to have an organization which is not just set up, again, as we said, as some little point somewhere in the world, which is a tax efficient or whatever, but somewhere where you're working very close with your stakeholders. So you understand what the needs are of your stakeholders. Because if you know that, again, they may have a need, but they don't actually know what's going to fulfill that need, which is often leads to innovations. And again, that comes from your knowledge of the market and capabilities of suppliers, etc. So all this internal knowledge about stakeholders, I think, is key. But also, I think trying to make your teams more interested in what's happening in the rest of the world. You know, we had a bit of a pre-conversation just about various things that are happening. But, you know, if you can get to the point where it's not, again, blinkers on, I'm interested in this little bit, but what else is happening out there? You know, what else is happening out there which is making a big difference? What are you doing in your own personal life? You know, everybody's sitting there with millions of apps. They do everything digitally. They're doing it in a very different way than they were doing it before. So how do you make sure that that is actually happening in your own business?
Yeah.
People separate the two things. You know, you may never spend you know, any cash in your life anymore, but then you go to work and you do something so basic and you think, you've got to think that there's got to be a better way.
Yeah.
So using this sort of outside world, and you know, you've probably heard this expression, bringing the outside world in and various things, but things that you think day to day that you see and you're interested in and you've heard about in social media or whatever, those are very interesting things, and you need to get your teams and yourself engaged in all those things so that you understand what's happening out there and how you can use it to best benefits for your business.
Hasn't the Olympics just been such a fantastic example of that? I've never known almost the whole world to just be so bought into what was going on. And
you're speaking to the wrong person on here, because I could bore you for hours on, you know, you probably know, but I'm a sports maniac. I love all that. You know, the Olympics was fantastic. The only thing was probably none of us had enough time to spend watching it all. But you know, must-see moments. Oh my God, there's so many of them. You've got to watch them because they're absolutely amazing. But listening to, again, being in sort of the health sector, you know, listening to people's stories about how they got there and how they get fit as they are and how they get quicker, and so many of those stories, you can bring those to business. And I know people have done that before, you know, the relay and passing the baton. You've probably seen all these things for maybe the last 20 years, but there's some truth in that. But the health side is super interesting. How people get faster than they were before. How do they get competitive advantage? What energizes them to do what they do? So many things in sport are so related.
one of my favorites was during the swimming, listening to a swimming coach, you know, talking about how Olympians prepare for a race and saying, you know, it's not like they just go in with one race strategy. They will have different strategies dependent on how they slept the night before, how they fueled up, you know, the day before, what races they had the 3 days before, who they're racing against.
Yeah, what they've got in 3 days time. Yes. Yeah.
You know, so nothing's a surprise. And isn't that the perfect example of what you're trying to do with building resilient supply chains, is What do we do when the factory burns down? What do we do when there's a global pandemic? What do we do when a ship gets stuck in Suez Canal?
Yes.
So that
And
you have
you've got to prepare for all those eventualities. That is so much with an athlete, because an athlete, you know, they're preparing and they're preparing. You know, we're quite lucky in business, so we think we're looking longer term, but there's lots of things which will probably mean that we hit that longer term. We'll still be there at least. You know, with an Olympian, they've got one particular day. You know, if you're looking at the 100 meters and you get the whole way there, you can actually get to the point where you get to the final and then you do a false start and you're out. And you've been working for 4 years to get to that point. So there's so many things that they prepare for. As you say, there's so many eventualities. What if I get injured then? What do I do? How can I get back into shape? But also the thing about the race preparation. How do I make sure I've got the right fluids? How do I make all this nutrition, everything else that goes with it? It is so different than it was, you know, 20 years ago, probably 5 years ago, 10 years ago. I see it as well here locally, again, massively into rugby. You see how those people are absolute athletes, where in the past they wouldn't have been. You see it at cricket. You used to see it quite large people with nice big beer bellies and various other. That's not the way they are anymore. They are athletes. And how they prepare and how they get ready for everything is so different. And businesses are no different. Businesses are no different. They have to be agile enough. They have to have thought through on the resilience side, what happens if?
Yeah.
And often what happens in resilience is something happens really badly, something goes very badly wrong, and then they react. And then they actually get money for it as well. Oh, we lost 100 million last year, so therefore here's 10 million to go and fix it. Wouldn't you rather spend that 10 million and not lose 100 million? You know, it's that's, and it never is 10 million, by the way. It's very rarely you're spending that amount on it. But there are things you can do beforehand, but do it before you lose the money, not afterwards.
Yeah.
So it's again, the Olympics is a great example, and also great to watch. Fantastic how people get so energized about the whole thing.
Totally. Pete, thank you so much. You've brought such a human element to procurement, and the focus on relationships to me is obviously it's what we do day in and day out, but I always find it fascinating hearing how other people are thinking about it. So thank you very much.
No problem. And we can talk about this another time, but yeah, human side's very important always.
Absolutely.
Great to speak to you.